todos me etiquetan. Como ella se mueve, siempre hace cosas que no debe. A ella le gusta el rum rum, el olor de la gasolina. Yo no soy Anita, pero soy tu medicina. Boom boom. Ey mami, como el disco suena, se pone bien rico pa' que la cosa esté buena. Pa' que la cosa esté buena. Y con ese estilo que tú tienes, nena. Chica, soplame la vela. No soy cementerio, pero te entierro todito un poco más.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We will be commencing momentarily. Once again, please take your seats. We will be commencing momentarily. Thank you.
Vamos pero a repetirlo otra vez. Yeah. Mala mía si tú estás buscando un mejor.
We can do better. Let me show you what a good time looks like. You can do better. So much better. I don't fit into your box. Beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better. I dare you to be wilder. I don't fit into your box. Beauty queens without no flaws. You can do better. I dare you to be wilder. I want to be silly, baby, dance the night away. I'll kick my shoes off if I want.
Ladies and gentlemen, to kick off our exploration of the MagicVerse, please welcome AT&T Communications CEO, John Donovan.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. We're winding our way towards the completion here. It's an honor and a pleasure to introduce the next speaker, the president, CEO, and founder of Magic Leap, Roni Abovitz. You'll quickly learn that Roni's an engineer by training. I like to say he's a recovering engineer. Before founding Magic Leap, he created companies specializing in computer-assisted surgery and surgical robotics. So you'll see a theme that Roni's always thinking about making people's lives better. But he's more than an engineer and an entrepreneur. He is, I think, truly a visionary, and not only a visionary, but a humanitarian as well. He and the Magic Leap team are at the forefront of bringing immersive digital content into every aspect of our lives. What they're building is the next great creative platform, spatial computing powered by 5G networks. It will redefine entertainment, sports, communications, learning, productivity, you name it. And you'll see that. It'll come to life for you when Roni goes through his vision for MagicVerse. And the first time I met Roni and his team at their Florida campus, I knew that AT&T had to be part of what you're going to see as an amazing vision. And I'm happy to say we formed a productive partnership last year. Please welcome a very dear friend, partner, and true visionary, Roni Abovitz. Hey, John.
Hey, everybody. Wanted to thank John and the AT&T team for having myself and Magic Leap here today. We're going to talk about a concept we call MagicVerse. So a little bit about our history of what we're doing, its origin and evolution. Really started out as a comic book company. Just thinking about wild and creative ideas. That's like a slice of one of our first comics, trying to imagine what this company would become one day. And wanted to liberate content into the world so that it would be around you. If anyone's tried The Dead Must Die, which you could see here, it's a little bit more unsettling when you're fighting a White Walker that's coming out of the wall into the world after you than just sitting comfortably on the couch. So we're beginning to see the idea of content liberated all over in space. And we were a loose collective, just wildly different minds from aerospace. I was employee 0. Sam, who was employee 1, came from NASA. We came from robotics, comics, film, medicine, and we came together to an interesting team. Today we're over 1,700 people. We've raised some significant capital, a couple $2 billion, and really thousands of patents and trademarks and things that we've built up over the last few years. I just want to talk to you about our evolution, which is really interesting. The first thing we built, I called it the Spatial Light Field Generator. We nicknamed it the Beast. It was this giant machine, like something out of Clockwork Orange, and you'd stick your head in this frame, and the idea was, could your brain be the display? So in order to understand if this stuff was working, myself and a couple of others, we were like the guinea pigs. And we were trying to understand what is a volumetric signal that could unlock your visual cortex to become this display. And then we evolved into something which is like what we're about today, which is like sensory field computing, the data that those devices create, they see you and they see the world, the notion of human-centered AI, and something we'll talk a little bit more deeply about, which is MagicVerse. One of the take-homes for today is that the world we see is one that this new internet being built, this amazing infrastructure that combines edge computing and data, these coming 5G internets, which will be everywhere. They're going to do amazing things, but they'll also bring a new class of devices and capabilities. So we see spatial computing, which is what we do, as one of the most interesting things that come out of a new internet. Again, an internet that brings like computing to the edge, super low latency, and a lot of compute combined with that data at the same time. It allows you to do things that we never could do before with the internet that we know. And we're doing that with telcos around the world. We started with ATT. They invented the telephone. Think about the building blocks of the internet from Bell Labs. We thought it was a fundamental new thing, and we were like, how does spatial computing become part of that new internet? And one of the key things is like the strategy of looking at that new internet getting built, which is edge computing infrastructure, low latency data. We realized that AT&T would be this ideal partner to bring our vision of this like spatial computing world that could live on top of that new infrastructure. And it so happened to be that they're building that at the time where our technology matures for these two things to come together. And that 5G infrastructure for us is really critical. What happens this year, between now and 21 and 22, 23 will be kind of an amazing kind of change happening in the world. A little bit of taste, if you haven't seen The Dead Must Die, this is just a little bit of that. If you've seen Game of Thrones this season, it's a little taste of actually participating.
There is only one war that matters, the Great War, and it is here.
So that little slice is literally just a tiny taste of what a massively multi-person world of spatial computing could be like, where the stories you experience on television become unlocked, and they're not just in little rooms, they'll be across whole spaces like this with thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, and eventually across whole cities and countries. A little bit about the differences between like what we consider to be spatial computing and VR and AR. Most of you are familiar with virtual reality. Virtual reality is generally where you might block the whole world, and you might go to like a virtual dream world. What I think of as AR is often when you hold up your phone and you're able to peer into that world. And what we're doing in spatial computing will allow AR phones to have what we call XR compatibility to also peer into that world. So this whole audience could be half spatial computing devices. All others can hold up phones and tablets and see that same shared world at the same time. And that's a property of something we're building called MagicVerse that allow you to do that. But in spatial computing, you have digital content that interacts with you and the physical world as if it actually has a sense of physicality and knowing the place. So the attributes we talk about what's spatial computing, think about what we're doing right now. We're in a physical space. Your brain is a biologic spatial computer. The universe is probably a kind of spatial computer. So we think about presence. Like right now, we're all present, and this sense of presence, if you look at the person to your left and right, they're not a video, there's like this neurologic sense of presence. We'll be able to deliver that digitally. There's actually some things you could see here at the SHAPE conference where you could see the beginning of real co-presence. If you see Micah, or if you see co-presence where you have something like the Kingsman movie happening, you're beginning to understand what that means. So presence, persistence, scale, awareness, interactivity, sentience, and respect. We'll sort of talk through all of those. So I'm going to give examples of like, here's some future city. It's a physical place. And then we'll have this like underlying, this is a Warner Brothers lot, so I could say this, almost like Matrix-like world where there will be a digital twin underlying what that world is. And that digital glue will hold the physical and digital and massive multi-person experiences together. So now you have that physical world populated with people, kind of like what we're doing today, but we're very, very close to this world where that physical digital has blended together. So you're walking through a city, there's AIs, there's avatar presences from other cities that are 5G connected. You might have whole experiences and things that are going on in multitudes of like different channels or layers that you can pop in and out of. And this world is coming incredibly soon. I'll give you a very practical example. Let's say these three folks are working on a new building, and that new building's off to the right. So the digital twin, imagine this living at the edge, where it's needed and where it's fast, and it's not just the geometry, it's semantic and live, and gives you this like digital physics and what's happening now of the real world. And that's living in this infrastructure. Suddenly a friend has through co-presence appeared and is there to talk to you, as if like in one of your seats somebody that's next to you just appeared. And there's a digital person who could be in Tokyo and suddenly they're at this conference right now. And now what we've done is we've added something that has real scale, a 10-story building. The architecture and CAD model, which is respecting the light of that moment in time, rendering upon that building. So you see, this is what the finished building looks like. And I might have persistent metadata that lives there for the construction workers. So if you go down and walk over that building, this giant digital layer is still there. It's glued to it. And you could say, stay there for 12 months. And only if you're the electrical engineer do you get to see like the pattern of information for that person. But let's say you're an AT&T telco engineer and you're walking around this new city going, where does my telecommunications network look like? Where are all the 5G Wi-Fi signals throughout the city? You change the layer and suddenly you're looking at the beginning of a physical digital city, which on one sense has all this infrastructure of this new internet and all the physical buildings and the people, but it has these digital layers that begin to grow amongst them. So one of our real goals over the next decade is how do we build up an entire network of digitally connected 5G cities that we think of as becoming the first real MagicVerse. And they'll have all kinds of semantic information, they'll have all kinds of entertainment functions, which we'll get into. And think about it starting out right now, you're having the beginning of these gigabit zones, these millimeter wave zones like at SHAPE today. And then they become all connected. So I'm walking around somewhere in Chicago, and suddenly I could appear in New York and LA or Detroit all at the same time. So we're eroding space and time, and you're sending your presence through this new network. The way you send photos and videos, you'll actually be sending your presence. And if you think about that, what that means globally, the US isn't the only site in the world that's building 5G. So as you perfect it here, it'll allow you to send co-presence and potentially work like at 9 a.m. in Tokyo, show up in Chicago, go to Miami, go to Los Angeles, go to Detroit. You're connecting people through something that we think is going to be quite extraordinary. And we see that as the beginning of what we think of as the MagicVerse, which is this like integrated layer of people, physics, this new high-speed edge computing, low latency internet that can really connect the globe to do all kinds of amazing things. So another way to look at it is we have the physical world layer. This is like an amusement park with a cool roller coaster. Then there's the data and inputs layer, things you might get from IoT, what's really happening right now, autonomous vehicles, drones, all kinds of cool stuff. And then you have this dynamic digital twin, almost like the spirit, like the ghost of the machine layer of this like place. And then you have all this amazing content that could have AI and a wide surface area of interactivity. And if you imagine them bound together through an operating system, which we're calling a MagicVerse operating system, then that entire physical place becomes a playground. What are some of the things you could do? So inside a place like this, you could have full-scale people. You could have an NBA game. So I have to give a shout out to Adam Silver because he was so gracious before talking about Magic Leap. So imagine going to a high school basketball court and suddenly your favorite players are doing a slam dunk competition. Or you're watching the NBA finals on you walk over to the neighborhood court and there they are full scale happening, remapped onto your local neighborhood. And a whole bunch of people are watching that. Imagine you can reclaim an arena and one of your favorite esports games is happening at 1-to-1 scale. Scale is one of the really cool things that we've barely scratched into, but in a space like the room we're in right now, you could do amazing things. So your favorite esports you might watch through a 5-inch screen or your phone. Imagine what that would be like, where the roof opens and a full-size bus, or whatever the esports happen to be coming in, and you could have a real live audience that are wearing spatial computing systems, holding up phones or tablets, bound together through a MagicVerse, which is the 5G edge compute world connected together through unique operating system layers that allow it's like an MMO in the physical world with digital layers. That's the best way to think about it. So cities will become playgrounds. You will be able to publish. If you're a developer, think about the way you publish to Unity or Unreal, or you just write C code, or you write web. You're able to publish onto a city at scale persistently. You'll be able to bring your favorite movies to life, not just in cities, but let's say in a forest, where suddenly something that you grew up watching in a movie, these characters are alive in your world, and they're there even when you're not looking at them. And that's kind of the incredible. They have their own life even when you're not looking. There's experiments we're doing at work, which are really incredible, where there's stuff just wandering around the building that if you don't happen to have your system on, doesn't mean they're still not there. So it's almost like that spirited away second world is still going on. Your favorite characters, we're in a DC universe here. Imagine being able to experience that kind of movie in Los Angeles, like a Batman Gotham City, where you've reskinned, like that architectural example. Imagine we've reskinned LA or Chicago. You have someone like Christopher Nolan do that across an entire city, and you punch into that for a week. And that's how you experience that story world. So you might encounter full-scale AI characters. A quick show of hands, who's seen and met Micah so far today? Because she's on campus. So the moment you meet Micah, you realize that meeting the Joker, meeting your favorite character, having that character pay attention to you in the real world, soon walking around powered by edge computing, and many characters like that, with many of you at the same time, that's coming in the next years. So the idea that you won't be apart from the story, but you will be part of it, and that story will be in your world, that is coming, and that's part of what we think of as MagicVerse, an incredibly creative, really cool playground for the best developers. So this is one of my favorite examples where you're in, let's say, a space like this, commanding your favorite monsters to battle with each other, and maybe they're at 1/10 scale. And you see the whole city. Maybe that city's like a bigature. It's 15 feet tall. But outside in Tokyo, which is connected to us, this is actually happening at full scale. If you're walking around Tokyo wearing a spatial computing system, you're seeing a multi-100-foot-tall Godzilla. You're seeing all these creatures battle with each other. And what's incredible is you can play with scale, location, co-presence. It'll turn the whole world into an amazing creative playground. And if we're in LA, so if you come from film and television, you're used to writing script for something linear, or a video game being trapped in your laptop or PC, begin to think we'll liberate that first to rooms, then to regions, like a park, and then you'll eventually have the entire city, and then multiple cities in the whole globe. What's really amazing is that this is being enabled by a few things, by spatial computing, by edge computing, by 5G infrastructures, and a lot by AI, but mostly by your creativity. Because if you don't have the imagination to unlock this stuff, it won't happen. So a good message for everybody, the future isn't escaping the real world. That's not what, at least what Magic Leap's about, or the MagicVerse about. It's breaking the limitations of the real world. It's cracking open that eggshell and taking a little bit look into the matrix, and we're definitely looking for our Neos. So just a little bit before we bring John back on about what's coming. So throughout this year, we'll be releasing developer tools for multi-person, developer tools for XR viewing, developer tools for MagicVerse building, so you can like digitally capture a space and share that with others. So we're starting step by step throughout this year, throughout next year, and we're building like our next devices, which will be smaller, sleeker. We'll be able to have outdoor capabilities. We'll have way more powerful sensors and AI. So this is all kind of amazing, and we're also timing for the proliferation of when 5G is everywhere and when we could offload a lot to the edge. So you have a few years, but you don't have like 10 years. You know, the next 24 to 36 months are going to be kind of an incredible ride. So I'd like to bring John back out.
Hey, Ronnie.
Hey, John.
Thank you. I think they're going to get us set up with a
good
place to sit. Please grab a chair. You know, I had some questions prepared for you, and then when I watched what you did there, I thought, you know, I don't know that I want to ask those questions.
We going off script?
Yeah. I'm sure you can handle it.
That's okay.
This riff, yeah. You know, if you look, this event has always been evolved from technology to really the intersection now of content, creatives, talent on both sides of the camera. And what you just described really is the palette of the artist is now radically changed. Just give some perspective on that.
Yeah, so if you're a screenwriter, you're writing a script, actors reciting it back, you film it, you know what you're doing, all of that's going to change. Because here you have AI entities that you'll have to create who are characters. It's like if you're an author and you breathe life into your character and they will come into life in the world, they will live on this like 5G edge MagicVerse, and they won't necessarily listen to you. So the idea that you will create characters who will be part of story worlds, just coming to grips with the fact that they will have their own dynamics. They may not completely listen to you. It's kind of an amazing and scary thing at the same time. But the palette is not just growing incrementally, it's growing in multiple dimensions at the same time. Yeah. So the most open-minded creators are going to have a lot of fun. And if you're pattern locked into a way of doing things, maybe a little scary for the next few years.
And just talk for a minute about the scale, because I think one of the hardest things here is when people think of digitization and that evolution of, you know, apps and functions and all that sort of stuff, you can sort of see the path. This scale that you talk about when you start to look at citywide, global, I mean, that whole scale dimension might be the trickiest part.
Yeah, it is definitely, we're laying out a vision of which I see real actions happening year over year. Like John's team at ATT is building 5G infrastructure in US cities like as we speak, starting last year. And you'll have many cities in the United States built up over the next few years. So this is happening, and what's amazing is that infrastructure is not like some mythical thing coming out in 10 years. And then the intersection of like AI capabilities, graphic capabilities, and what we know is coming with our next generation devices, I could just see all them coming together. But the scale of complexity of thinking, like how do you write and create at such large scale? Is it teams? Is it people working with AIs? It's a whole nother game. It's a minimum like the kind of folks that build MMO worlds will at least have a starting point. Mm-hmm. If you're thinking very small, very linear, you have to really expand and free your mind fairly quickly.
Yeah, you know, over the course of the last couple of years, I've watched some of the things you've built, and there's no pattern to them. In that, you know, it's not like, oh, gaming is the obvious thing. You know, art is the obvious thing. basketball is the obvious game to put on there. It's really kind of been a creative process where the right partner thinking the right way has come in and you've built stuff. So I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about some of the ones that you've showed me, like what it might do for theater going for, and Adam talked earlier about what he envisioned basketball games of the future being like.
Yeah, so I'll start with basketball, which is incredible, because the arena itself is really a wonderful space. It's indoor, so it's a good place to start. It's got a very controlled, structured environment. You could completely digitize the inside of the arena, so you can get that nailed. That's not changing that much. The people are changing inside it. You could wrap the inside arena with all sorts of volumetric capture sensors, which gives you great views to allow all sorts of reconstruction. And then you could rig up with 5G networks the ability to pull that data out. So basketball has a really great beginning. It could be one of the very first things that you see it really happen at commercial scale. But what's interesting about it is, like, one, you'll have your ultimate sports bar view. Imagine having like lots of digital screens you could just pop up and pick your favorite views. Eventually, like, an AI will know what you love watching and which cameras, virtual cameras, it'll just create to give you your absolute best picks, like which player you want to follow based on your likes. So your own sports bar is very different. But then you'll be able to easily reconstruct. And this is stuff we're showing today. What I think of as a skybox view, like there's the game happening on your floor, or there's the game happening full size in your high school gym, or there's the game happening and you're the home team, your team is away, you just remapped the away game back in the home arena and you're seeing that. Like that's the beginning of the future of basketball. That's like the obvious stuff I could see right now. It gets very interesting when, like, you're at home watching the game and suddenly your favorite player is there. Yeah. Like you and I are talking, and like what you did with Mike earlier, and that AI knows all the stats and it's giving you running commentary, and gives you a post-game recap, and the MVP shows up in your living room. These things are not very wild. They are doable, let's say, in the next 5 years. Beyond that, really wild things will start to happen. I mean, I think there's a class of creator and developer who, some of you might be here, who your starting point is what I just described, and you're going to take us to places unknown, and that's what's very exciting.
Kenny Smith was talking about, once he got a view, we walked around the lot, and he looked and he said, I have to have this, because ultimately I have a bird's eye view of basketball as someone who played the game. But if I can get these kinds of views, I can say he passed it to this person for what was a reason that wasn't obvious to a bird's eye, because what he saw was a body move a certain way, and he read that play. He might have read it wrong, but he said it'll just take analysis of things to a whole nother level. You and I just had a really interesting experience that I'm not sure shouldn't be shared with a wider audience. And when we went over to see the hackathon participants, what's your recap of your rendition of what we saw over there?
Yeah, I was incredibly inspired and amazed by the hackathon winners. One of them, and you might remember the name, I've got him on my pocket.
MagicVerse.
Brilliant. They were amazing. And it's how to use spatial computing and multiple people in a classroom. So you'd have a teacher wearing our kind of device, and you'd see planets or whatever the educational material would be. Kids can hold up phones, tablets in this shared world, add, create, or also have a device like that. And you can imagine connecting all these classrooms and schools together. It would completely change the tide of STEM in the United States. Because, first of all, just being in that, just at this very early stage, I would love to be 10 years old right now and have that team be my teacher, because all of a sudden your engagement is so awesome. You're not like seeing a planet on a piece of paper. There is the planet, there's comets, everything is coming to life, whatever the topic would be. That kind of open verse book, I'd love the Department of Education to like give them a ton of money, because I think that kind of thing is incredible, but has more impact than just that local school. It could literally bring a lot of students into STEM, because they could say, how do I make that? It'll be way more engaging than whatever they're doing, because it fully captures your senses. So the idea of sensory education I thought was super exciting.
Yeah, and they showed, planets and the sky, and you could launch games, and But what to me was really cool is that he said he saw you speak last fall, and he was a teacher, and it changed his whole life because the teacher became the creator. And, you know, it's, I don't remember the number, 3 or 4 people are all that worked on this.
It was
kind
incredible.
of as a hobby, and all of a sudden he's got a whole new vision for how a classroom can become an interactive experience for kids to not learn science, but experience science.
Yeah, if you're at all intimidated by what we've been talking about, don't be. Go see the OpenVerse team and some of the winners. These things were built in a few days by just like sometimes 2, 3, 4 people who were inspired, and the tools are there, and they did amazing things. Like, so the on-ramp is actually a very low cost barrier to get in and start building. It's not like you need to be a gigantic corporation to like begin doing something cool. We're trying to build a platform and tools, but literally any like subgroup of any 2 of you sitting in a row could go start something, and you know, between today and like the end of the week, you could have built something incredibly neat just in a few days. We saw a hackathon one, which I thought was incredibly amazing, with a deep learning team that were extracting information out of like League of Legends. I think the U.S. government's going to find them. That was super cool. But that was like, you know, in an inspired few days, like a very small team just did amazing stuff that changes the course of like your ability to win. That kind of thing could affect sports. Also, you can visualize and view that stuff. It was incredible.
Yeah, my son took my kit last year and started building avatars to visualize things he was working on. And it wasn't like because he wanted to build something in the MagicVerse. He just thought visualizing his work was a good way to evaluate whether it was smooth and beautiful and elegant, because his view is, if it looks right, the formula's probably right.
By the way, the one I thought was also super clever, there's a boxing one where they used simple haptics. There's a giant bag that you hit, but when you have a Magic Leap system on, there is a shadow boxer in there punching you. So the digital person erases the bag, so you don't see the bag, but you feel you're hitting the bag. So they gave our atomless objects atoms. It was a really brilliant lo-fi blend of like haptics plus digital. I thought it was a very
Well, you're such a creative person. The first thing you said is, why are you using an avatar? Why don't you get the real boxers and have them fight with their tendencies, and you could actually have a real fight?
Yes, you could.
Just wouldn't hurt. So, you know, I think a lot of people maybe don't understand the Magic Leap roadmap, because a lot of folks look at like even that progression. I was struck by, you look at 2014, 2016, 2018, and they're not, you know, they're kind of looking at 2018 and saying, oh, well, it's a little too expensive, it's a little bigger than I would wear around, you know, a downtown for 7 hours. And so as you start to look, it'd be really helpful to say, what's 2022 look like, what's 2020's version, 2022, and just so they get a sense of how rapidly this thing is coming into the realm of consumerism.
Yeah, so if you look at the very first thing we did, Magic Leap 1, it's like our Apple one. It's the Creator Developer Edition. We put it out there for people to learn how to build on, you know, schools to learn how to build on, early enthusiastic consumers, early businesses. We're timing our pacing to the emergence of 5G. So if you think about like 2019 through 2025, and if you mapped out like the flow of cities like AT&T's building out, so if you look at 20, 21, 23, 25, there's a lot of really cool things we'll be releasing in sort of big increments. So like major platforms, our next major device change is, how do you make this small, sleek, with a much bigger volume of view? How do you have much better sensing for different lighting conditions? How do you have something that you could see lots of people using as a consumer? With like a lot of interface learnings, like what were the best things that we've extracted from the first learnings for ML1. So that's the hardware side and the operating system side, but also putting out the tools to have, we think, a couple critical things. How do you get to massively multi-person? So you have like massive shared reality experiences, enabling XR compatibility. So if half the room has a Magic Leap Next and the other half just has phones and tablets, everyone can see the same thing, And that binding glue, we're thinking of those as the MagicVerse tools. And then how do you pull an incredible compute beyond what's on the device? One of the ways we're going to shrink things is look at what edge computing can do, not just the low latency data, but how much can we pull from the edge? So as the device gets smaller, your compute is just growing exponentially because you're pulling from the edge. That will be the amazing curve you'll be on as a developer. So if you think 2019 through 25, we'll have a number of major platform jumps that the very next one will feel very consumery. And then each one after that is to get wider and wider scale. But I would also say that if you're a business, you're probably going to come online even faster. Because businesses will have probably installations faster than whole cities. They'll have their own edge infrastructures, their own 5G infrastructures more quickly. They have structured environments and their own private servers. So you might encounter this as a B2B or a B2B2C before mass consumer, where every city in the world is fully 5G and everywhere. So I think you're going to have this hybrid world where you'll have pockets of consumers in a lucky city where it's all happening pretty quickly, or a school you're at, or in your own home. But you might see companies incorporating this much earlier because they have more infrastructure capability. They can deliver a lot more quickly.
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of mind-blowing at scale is that you talk about twinning and getting physical infrastructure twinned so that you can start to put virtual experiences in. This is the part that takes big vision. This is bold, but basically you're saying you're going to map the world.
Yeah, so
and not in a single dimension, not like roads. We're talking about map the world.
Yeah, so the digital twinning is really, our most ambitious thing is that there is a dynamic, contextually aware, almost sentient digital twin of the world, like all the IoT objects, vehicles, buildings, that has like a very low latency relationship to what's happening in the real world. And when you have that, there's amazing things that can happen. There's a lot you could do before you're fully there, so you don't have to wait for the complete, perfect digital twin to emerge. And in fact, it'll probably never be one-to-one perfect with the physical world, but just the very beginnings of it offer amazing opportunities, like co-presence, where you could send your presence to other places, will be an early enablement. Understanding what's happening, the patterns of life if you're city government, will be incredible. So digital twinning will be a project that goes on as a higher and higher fidelity thing for many decades. But we're not trying to make like a simple map. And I think what's really cool is that twin can really live at the edge, because that's where you're going to need it. You need it when you encounter the real world.
Physical world.
Yeah, that was a great thing I just saw at one of the AT&T booths about the latencies of the real world are like sub 10 millisecond. So we're concerned about that part of the digital twin that you encounter as a human being or a vehicle. That's the really exciting new part.
Yeah, I think the analogy would be if Henry Ford building a car didn't envision the progress you could make with roads, what might the tires have looked like?
Right.
So you have to sort of, and I think you do a fair amount of that, right? You look at everything adjacent to you. We happen to have an intersection called the network that has this important thing called latency that allows for the MagicVerse to become a reality. But you were looking at that years ago, saying, where do we get? You're doing that with compute and silicon, and it just seems to me like wherever the world doesn't give you what you want, you've decided to go build it, right?
Yes, and I think one of the things that I'm incredibly thankful for is that building the entire 5G internet infrastructure is not something Magic has to try to do on its own. That there's companies like AT&T that are taking on giant, big, ambitious chunks of that. 'Cause that's like enormous task that would probably take us a century.
but not to be discounted. You said, okay, the chips to do this stuff don't exist.
Right.
You said biologically, no one has been able to take and not trick the brain, but actually replicate what the brain does to give you these visual experiences. So it's not like you were sitting there with all these things coming together, that you have the internet, you have credit cards, you have all these things. Hey, why don't I just put shopping on the internet?
Yeah, one of the things we do, and it's really good to clarify, we'll vision cast like out 5, 10, 20 years, and then we'll reverse engineer what that is, and then we'll start releasing tools and devices to make that happen. So It's almost like you need to vision cast out much farther in order to provide the roadmap to the team and our partners of where we'd like to be and where they're going and help to influence that. And then it's also important to deliver things that allow people to start building that. So as we get bigger and more mature as a company, it's releasing the tools to increase the rate of that vision becoming a reality. But I think it's also important to always vision cast. Like a good part of what I was talking about today are things we're working on that will release even this year, but there's also vision casting, like entire Los Angeles City, fully on edge, full 5G, Godzilla running around everywhere. That's not next year, but will that happen maybe the next 5 to 7 years? It's possible. Will that happen within 10 years? Probably super likely.
But for folks in the audience here, where the rubber meets the sky with visionaries is, I often tell them, don't ask me what I think, ask me what I'm doing with my kids. Right. So if I'm out there sitting in the audience and say, look, I'm in my early 20s and I'm getting ready to start a career, or I have kids in high school, like, which part of this, what is the guidance there that says, what do you do? How do you get in the game? How do you get in the game to move yourself from someone who's got an aptitude in art or a strong bent towards science? How do you get in this game into this world that is going to, be a growth juggernaut in the future?
If you're, I'll go college, high school, middle school. If you're a freshman in college, you need to become fluent in deep learning and AI programming. By the time you graduate with your 4 years, we'll be in a full-fledged 5G spatial computing world, meaning you'll start to see this all over the place. And whatever you're learning now might get replaced by something else. So it'd be a really good time. So, freshmen coming into college, I would start to get really serious about it. So then that's completely true about everyone in high school and everyone in middle school. Like they're absolutely going to be coming into this world. If I'm a senior graduating college or I'm in grad school, I would also follow that advice, because one of the most important things you're going to need is to be highly adaptive and fluid. Things are changing really quickly. But if you're an artist or an engineer, I don't think there's only one way in. One of the things I think we've learned both intuitively but also sometimes painfully at Magic Leap, you need these work teams who are their left brain and right brain. You need artistic, creative people who can imagine, and they need to be partnered with highly analytical, very serious engineers, and they need to respect each other. That both sides matter. Yeah. I think being on this lot today is really awesome, because it's like AT&T on top of the Warner Brothers lot, to me, says everything about where the world's going. It's this fusion of incredible technology and people that invented the phone with the people that helped invent the film world. And it's so exciting, because to me that merger was one of the dreams I had at Magic Leap, those two sides of the brain coming together, and they've been separated for too long. Most people really are both. It's artificial that you've been separated to I'm an artist or an engineer, or I'm analytical, or I'm creative, or I'm intuitive, or not. You're really all of those things at once, and I think we're trying to push that back together. So I wouldn't be scared. If you're a writer, artist, painter, it doesn't matter. You can find your way into this world.
Interestingly, when you look at the intersection, a lot of folks don't realize, but Bell Labs won an Academy Award because they were the first ones that synchronized audio and video as the Warner Brothers were moving from, silence to talkies. So we've always belonged together. Last question, when you think about MagicVerse as the creative palette, how do you envision the creative process working its way into that platform? Is it going to pull together more like hackathons or more like traditional storyboarding? How do you see this process? Because frankly, most of the experiences right now have been built in your building. How do you see that coming together?
Yeah, so I'll describe the easiest to the hardest. So the easiest is, I think, hackathons, a couple folks, overnight, over a weekend, you can make a really cool first thing. There's no rule on how simple or how sophisticated it could be. So you can do effective, really amazing things with just a few people. You're going to get to the point where a kid can paint all over an entire city just all by themselves. So That's going to be, if you've ever played with our Create app, expand Create to be 10 kids running around Los Angeles or New York, and you'll get the idea. And give them the ability to have scale. So instead of a purple dinosaur that's 12 inches, it's suddenly 200 feet tall. Instead of small buildings, they're giant buildings, and suddenly a kid will just paint an entire city. So you don't need to know anything, you just start playing with it and you're suddenly building stuff. But I think the ones that will really flourish are the kind of people that conceptualize worlds. Like if you're the next Tolkien, if you're the next Wachowskis who did The Matrix, shout out to John Gata, he won an Academy Award for it, he's in here. That kind of visionary thinking, those people, they're going to go to town with these tools. Like look how far they pushed books. Yeah. You know, like think about like what Tolkien did, and Warner Brothers brought that to life in like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or J.K. Rowling, you know, using. You know, I visited her cafe a few weeks back. I went to Scotland, and I went to the cafe where she wrote Harry Potter, and it was amazing because the environment almost tells you this is going to be a Harry Potter book. You see a castle on the hill. Yeah. I took the train ride she would take from London to Scotland, and you could see the environment there. And if she had our system, she might have actually just brought it all to life there in Edinburgh. It would have been kind of amazing. But I think world builders, so the J.K. Rowlings, the Tolkiens, the Wachowski brothers, that kind of thing, those people with these tools are going to unleash the most amazing, most creative things that I think the world's ever seen. And that it's not the ones who did it, it's probably the ones in the audience who we don't know yet. The next Wachowskis, the next Tolkiens, you're there. You're in middle school, you're in high school, you could be in the front row. That's what's super exciting.
Great. Well, Roni, I want to thank you. We're out of time, but extraordinary. And I think that it's amazing to watch your vision come to life here in a way that's not only impressive technologically, but it's ambitious in what I believe you're going to get done here. So thanks for your vision, your energy, and thank you for your partnership.
John, thank you so much. Thank you, John. Thanks,
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please join us for our final session. At 5:30 p.m., it will be a conversation between Elizabeth Banks and Laverne Cox. If you're exiting, please make sure to take all your belongings, as once you exit, there will be no re-entrance. Thank you once again.